if you happen to miss one of the medical grand rounds and just can't sleep at night because you couldn't catch up on it, that those are all now being posted on YouTube. And so you can check out previous grand rounds or ones you particularly liked and want to savor 2 or 3 more times, like a good rerun, or share with friends, or share with your on your teaching service or something. Keep in mind that those are available on YouTube and they're uploadable. And with that, turn it over to Steve, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Bob. It is just so wonderful to welcome Jeff Wiese, the Emory Academy of Medical Educators, are coordinating his visit, and he's spending today with several discussion groups, and tomorrow he'll be the keynote address speaker for the Learning to Be a Better Teacher program that's coordinated by Bill Branch. And Dr. Wiese is a professor of medicine at Tulane. He's a senior associate dean for graduate medical education. He's the associate chair of medicine. And what's really heartwarming is to hear that his absolute favorite activity is to do what he's been doing since he arrived at Tulane in 2000, is to be the director of the internal medicine residency program. And Dr. Wiese grew up near Kingfisher in a sparsely populated area of Oklahoma, where he played football and then had to get his suit off so he can play saxophone in the marching band during halftime, and actually went to Drake in Des Moines, Iowa on a football scholarship. So he's a football player, he's a rugby player, and now he's a soccer coach for 5-year-olds. And after that, he went to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He was a resident and chief resident at University of California in San Francisco. And then after that, he actually created his own special education fellowship year, during which he wasn't attending and again got the funding and did a lot of activities related to education. And he's been at Tulane since 2000, and I would encourage all of you, if you want to see what is really a model of a career for the last 16, 17 years, is to look at his site on Tulane and his incredible accomplishments, 50 teaching awards, including the ACGME Parker Palmer Courage to Teach Award, the ACP's Walter McDonald Award. He's written over 100 articles and books and book chapters, and he was the one who wrote the grant to bring hospital medicine to Charity Hospital, where he is now. So he is one of the founders of hospital medicine at that location. He's been the leader in the Society of Hospital Medicine, and he was also instrumental in developing a focused hospital medicine accreditation with ABIM. So Dr. Wiese has been part of the core group who have defined hospital medicine across the country, as well as certainly many people over many years have been working on creating residency programs. But he is a national leader. He's at the forefront of what does it mean to have a residency program? How do you make that the best possible residency program? So it is, again, so wonderful to have Jeff Wiese share his experience with us today. So, Jeff?
All right, thank you, Stephen. So with that introduction, my guess is that you liked me there for a while until he mentioned ABIM, and then I took a dive, but I'll see if I can make up. Now, so I've been told 2 things about this Grand Rounds. One is that I have to stand at this podium, which Dan knows is just killing me already. But I will do my best. The second thing I've been told is that I was supposed to give some personal anecdote about myself, which I thought was fantastic because, who doesn't want to hear about me, right? But here's the personal anecdote that maybe segues a little bit into the talk itself. And I know some % of you are in the crowd waiting to figure out what the title of this talk means, which was the purpose of using that title to get you in the seats. But here's a personal anecdote about me. As Stephen introduced me, I came to Tulane in 2000, quickly assumed the role of chief of the medical service at Charity, and within a year or 2 became the program director. So what you can say is that for the last 16, 17 years, I've been in the dual role of being, one, a hospital administrator, and we'll see, show of hands, any administrators in the crowd? Nobody wants to admit it, okay? And 2, as being the program director. So, let me tell you about the inside the actor's studio tip of how administrators and program directors think, okay? First, as program directors, and I'm looking to Lorenzo and Karen who can nod with me. As program directors, we genuinely believe that all evils in the universe can be solved with a curriculum. Right? You give me an Excel sheet big enough, you got a problem with global warming, I'll fix that. All right? And as a program administrator, we genuinely believe that all evils in the universe can be solved with a policy and an accompanying mandatory module where everybody's made to do that, right? So heretofore, all patients will be discharged by 11 a.m., right? Because in my hospital CEO's parlance, or his view of the world, every medicine bed is a wasted ortho bed. So out they go. So you do that for 5 years, and that's what I did to start my career. I made curricula, and I made policies, and I made people do mandatory modules online about hand washing, et cetera, et cetera. And 5 years later, you wake up and you realize that everybody's smarter, everybody knows what they're supposed to do, but nobody's doing what they need to do. Nothing changed. And what you realize over the course of time is that curriculum and policies and procedures might not lead to the changes that you expected. Put another way, the policies and procedures work when somebody's watching, like a speed limit, right? When I know there's a highway patrol around, then I'll drive that speed limit. I get to northern Louisiana, then I'm driving, believe it or not, just as fast as I possibly can go, mostly because I need to get out of northern Louisiana. But the point is going to be this. Policies, procedures govern behavior while somebody's watching. But as a program director, one day you wake up, Karen, if you haven't already, you will, in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, and in your mind will be a number, and that number will be 65. 80-hour work week, 15 hours where residents are being directly supervised by faculty. What are the residents doing in those 65 hours? Put another way, what governs behavior when no one's watching? And what governs behavior when no one's watching is culture. Those shared roles, goals, expectations, and beliefs. And after 5 or so years as being an administrator or program director, one day you learn that if you're meaningfully going to affect change in a way that meaningfully improves the lot of your patients' lives, that we're going to have to touch on culture. Because either you own culture or culture is going to own you. Now, the question I'm going to submit to you, and it'll be the discussion for our 50 minutes or so together, is can you manipulate and change culture? Can you change those shared roles, goals, expectations, and beliefs? Well, okay, so the title, It's Not What You Think, right? Which I think is a pretty good title, right, Dan? Yeah, 1, because a lot of people came to this Grand Rounds just to figure out what that meant, right? And 2, because if I offend you, which in all probability I will, that at the end of the hour I can say, no, it's not what you think, right? But another way, it's not what you think, it's how you think. And I'll tell you, over the last 10 years of being an administrator and being a program director, this is where I've moved. It's how we spent our morning with the Academy of Medical Educators talking about how do we get people to see the world differently? Put another way, how do I socialize people into the profession? And once into the profession, how do I socialize them in a way that it is meaningfully improving my patients? Those shared roles, goals, expectations, and beliefs. And so I'll invite you to go with me on that journey just to see if it might be done. Some things to think about. But first, a few meta lessons. First and foremost, which would be good if the politicians had figured this out, but they still haven't. No one changes anybody's mind. The only person to change a person's mind is that person. Number 2, if you're going to change somebody's mind, you don't start with how you want them to see the world. You start with how they see the world. And you ask yourself, well, why is that they see the world in that way? And you work backwards from there. And 3, as opposed to doing that mandatory module or PowerPoint presentation of here's how you should think differently, if you meaningfully want to change people's minds, you look to those ordinary things. As Marcus Aurelius put it, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Those things you do day in, day out. Put another way, it's easier to act your way into new beliefs than it is to believe your way into new actions. We'll give some examples as we go along. But the jagged little pill, whether you like it or not, this one's true. You own the culture, or this thing's going to own you. And like all systems, the definition of a bad system is that it puts good people in bad positions. And the definition of any system is that it is perfectly designed to produce the results that it does. You don't like the results, you look back at the system. And when it comes to educational space, this is going to be your culture. Well, okay, let's start with shared roles, goals, expectations, and beliefs. Now, the other thing I was told about grand rounds, and I'm referencing, as I go into this part, Albert Bandura and some of his social determinism theory, I was told that I was supposed to use a patient case, but since I'm doing medical education grand rounds, I'm going to use the student as if the student was the patient. Now, what I want to take you through is the psychology of the good student versus the psychology of the bad student. Now, before I get those disapproving looks, okay, listen, I get it. They're all the same in the eyes of the Lord. They're all good people, blah, 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 blah. I'm talking about good performance versus bad performance, okay? So, here is the pathophys of a good student and how that good student becomes that good student. Ready? And I'll couch all this by saying what's going to make this really hard for you is that you're all really good. So this is stuff that happened to you without even you knowing it. Tacitly, you just don't get why a bad student is a bad student, right? That's why I'm dissecting it. But a good student gets put into a new environment, let's say the wards, right? And that student sends out a ping, some behavior. Now, I'm assuming that you have an electronic medical record here, yes, and all meaningfully using it, yes. What do you use here? EPIC, yes, that's what we have too, which stands for an epic number of student notes to cosign, doesn't it? Yes, indeed. But pre-EPIC, and my residents just can't believe me when I tell them this, that, you know what, before EPIC, we had paper, and these things called pens. You wrote an order, yeah. Pre-EPIC, we had paper charts. So, one day, my student co-signed my note. Agree. And he signed his name, right? I was like, all right, one, you didn't use the proper linking language, right? Which you have to have seen, examined, and discussed the patient with me, and then you can agree. But two, no, you don't agree, right? I agree. You play your position, right? But it wasn't his fault, you see, because what he had learned, of course, being a concrete thinker, albeit, was that whoever came around second, if a note was on the chart, then you agreed with it, right? And it just happened to be that day that I'd come around first and wrote the note. So, okay, he did that bad behavior, and what he got in response was, hey, PYP, play your position. You're a student, I'm the attending, I agree, right? Corrected behavior, and so he adjusted his behavior, and for the rest of that month, I agreed with his notes. Yeah? So for the good student, this is, again, you, right? Which is why it's problematic to understand that bad student, is that the good student sends out pings and gets feedback, right? And over this cycle, we'll send out more pings and get more feedback. And over the course of that time, the student's going to develop a set of expectations. Now, what defines the student as being a good student is that those expectations actually coincide with reality. They're effective. Well, enter the bad student, who, believe it or not, sends out that same ping. Now, you would think that there was some malevolent force, right? Like Jerry Jones here. Yeah. See, I thought I'd get more of a laugh. Maybe I'm a week off. When the Falcons play the Cowboys, this will be funny, all right? Jerry Jones is a Sith Lord. But you'd think there would be a really bad person saying, oh, yeah, bad behavior. Keep doing that bad behavior. No. As it works out, it's not an exercise in abuse. The bad student develops because of an exercise in neglect, because there's no feedback given to that student. And so the student does that bad behavior again and again and again, and eventually the student assembles the same set of expectations. The difference being is that those expectations do not coincide with reality, right? Yes, indeed. Now you're saying, well, this would never happen to me, right? And at Emory, you're probably right. But here I am to speak to the choir, right? Because that's how you get the choir to sing. That what you're doing right may not be the case at every institution in which students and residents are being trained. And I'm just submitting this. What's the probability that, I don't know, an attending's working 3 days as an attending, or maybe just a week? Maybe the students are on the Gregorian calendar, right? And the residents are on the Zodiac calendar, right? And that we have that bad behavior on a Friday. and that you're going off service, and you're saying, you know what, next dude coming on, he'll fix that. Lots of cracks. And the more fragmented the schedules are, the higher the probability that this neglect actually comes to pass. Add in the fact, the pressure of the RVUs and seeing all the patients getting all the work done. Maybe there isn't that time as much as you'd like to sit down, the student down and say, hey, you know, not good behavior. Well, along comes you down the road, right? And you say, hey, that's not good behavior. But there that student is, you see, nestled in that granuloma, all right, of their expectations, right? And your feedback just bounces right off of that granuloma. Why? Because it is psychologically disconcerting for that student. Because if these expectations that I hold to be true, or held to be true, if they're not right, then what other expectations do I have are not right? Right? Like gravity? Yeah, that's right. Right? Should I still breathe? Yep, keep doing that one, right? But you see, psychologically, it's a lot easier to put the blame on you. And you'll know this, and I'm looking to my medical education administrators because you've heard these words, right? And the words are, you don't understand me, right? People aren't being nice to me. They don't get me. That's the granuloma deflecting it. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to dive into this a little bit deeper. I will spare you that pain of taking you down Jacob's ladder to get people out of the granuloma, but what we can agree is that the best way to deal with this problem of students locked in their granuloma of dysfunctional expectations is to not get there in the first place, which is to say, setting the expectations. Now, don't worry. I can already see people in the back. Do we have residents in the back? Yes, strategically positioned to fake page yourself out of here if this talk goes south. I know you. All right, I'm keeping an eye on you. All right, I'm not going to talk you through all of these expectations, but I will say this. Ready? As a program director, I used to look at this as an ACGME requirement. That's the way I went at it, right? We'd have all these 30-page expectations everybody had to sign, and we could prove that everybody got it. Now I look at it as, you know what, even if there weren't an ACGME, this becomes the crux, because every ward team is its own microcosm of a culture. You don't set your expectations, and you don't have time to set your expectations, well, guess what? You definitely don't have time to do what comes next, which is fixing the behavior, which is going to go in a completely wrong direction. Just to give you some sense of how much this matters to me, I got called in, it's probably been 6 months ago, for a program that was on a death sentence, right? I don't know how many citations, but it was double digits. And ACGME was about to pull it. So they brought me in for 2 days to try to rehab this residency program, keep it alive. I spent 1 full day on that slide. And that's what we did. For as much as program directors pat ourselves on the back that we build the program, et cetera, I'm going to give you the holy grail. It comes down to this. You touch on faculty development, and you get faculty engaged in the way of setting the right expectations and defining that culture for that ward team, 99% of your problems are now solved. And if you don't, then you're out. Well, I'm not going to go through all of these. I will say you can find all of these in my book, Teaching in the Hospital, which I guess I should have disclosed as a conflict of interest because I do make 50 cents a copy. So buy a lot of them. Make good Christmas gifts. Yes. And this is my favorite part of the book, you see, because here we have a senior physician and a student and the senior physician pointing and saying, this is a computer. All right? Which, as I told the publishers, should have been the other way around, right? We should have had the student saying, this is how you turn this on, right? But fair enough, you'll find the details. For purposes of our limited time, I want to talk about two right now, just to drive home a couple salient points with respect to defining your culture. First, as you set the expectations, it becomes very, very important that everybody's in the room at the same time. Why? Because I'm driving Karen back to that 65. Because when you're not around, what you need is that side-to-side enforcement. You need the interns to know what the resident expectations are. You need the resident to know what the student expectations are. Everybody knows exactly what their role is to play on the team, right? Second is that as you deliver expectations, know this. Anybody coming to your ward team is not coming tabula rasa. No, they're coming with all the previous expectations of all prior clinical experiences loaded. And some of those students may in fact be coming with the expectations they received on ortho. So you should not be shocked when their notes are AFib, VSS, no broken bone, right? That's going to be their admission note. That was their expectation. Nothing wrong with that on ortho, but a different set of expectations for our culture. Here's the way that you beat it, and here's the problem, you see. If you set out your expectations and say, this is what I want you doing it this way, this way, this way, this way, what they're going to be holding on the right lobe of the brain is going to be your expectations, but on the left lobe are all those previous expectations. And they're going to compare them side to side and say, well, you know, maybe this is just Wiese's way of doing it, right? Subjective. His style. But the problem with subjective, you understand, is that if it is sitting in that subjective space, it's unenforceable. Any more than you come into my house and saying, hey, you should paint your house blue, right? That's your opinion. That's great. But it doesn't necessarily guide my behavior. Now, the way you beat it is providing the rationale by saying, hey, here's my expectation for you, Dan. I want you to show up at 6:30 to take sign-in, person to person, eyeball to eyeball now, right? I don't want you doing it by phone. I don't want you leaving a card, right? I want you person to person with a night float. Reason being is that if you don't, you're not going to be in a position to ask questions about what happened last night. We're not going to be able to get done what we need to get done. That's the reason. The more you bring the rationale, the more you bring the gravitas to the expectation you're delivering, the more it starts to guide the culture of the team. Well, I'm going to begin with the end in mind, poetically, towards the end of the talk, if you're okay with that. But I want to move now to changing beliefs. All right, Stephen, do we have volunteers? I need 3 volunteers. 3 very cool people. Yes, all right, ward team. And for people watching out there, I'm going to talk you through it. I may have to step to the side here for a second. But this will be my ward team, including one sick person who looks to be up front. Yes? You want to be the patient? Yes? Okay. All right, good. Come on up, ward team. Hang out right here. Yes? All right. You guys confer, do your scut list for right now. I'm going to talk these guys through a little bit of where we're going next. Because what I'm going to try to demonstrate for you is a little bit about patient-centered rounds. I know this speaks to Lorenzo, who's been, and again, in some ways, with him as being your leader for several years, this is probably innate in your DNA. But I'm going to make this case, that even if it weren't the right thing to do in the way of being patient-centered, that if you're interested in changing the culture of the way people think, it is a colossal opportunity. Because inside that room is going to be a level of gravitas that you are not going to find out in the hallway or in a conference room in getting people to think differently. Now, I promised the Academy of Medical Educators that this morning that I would be pragmatic and practical, because what I do not want to be is that educrat that stands up and preaches, oh, you should do this, you should do that, right? Meanwhile, as a faculty physician, I'm like, I got to get 5,000 RVUs, right? All right, so I'm going to try to do this in a way that saves us time, but at the same time, gets done in the way of leveraging what we'd like to see in the way of our culture. So it begins with step 1. And if there is any benefit, yeah, you guys can hang out at the piano. I wish I knew there was going to be a piano here. Okay, so it begins with the lab spy. And if there's any benefit to EPIC, it's this, right? Because post-call, this is what I'm doing. I'm waking up with my coffee, or my team's post-call, right? I'm waking up with my coffee, 5:36, or whenever my 6-year-old decides to wake me up. And immediately I'm going to EPIC, right, to see, scan through all the notes from the night before. Yeah, anybody do this? Yeah, it's great because in years past, before we had EPIC, you had to sneak into the hospital, right? Because you couldn't, I'll touch on that, you couldn't let them see you doing their job. So you had to be on a different floor, running around, whatever. But pre-EPIC, now I can do that in my PJs, go through it. Now, the reason for doing this becomes severalfold. First and foremost, it's to time manage what my post-call is going to be, right? So fully capped, 14 patients, very sick, then all right, no personal stories. It's going to be sad for you, but I'm going to have to go pretty quick, right? If you only got 5 patients, rule out chest pain, right? All of them 24, anxiety disorder, then okay, now we're going to have many more in the way of my dialogues. But the second reason is simply this, okay? And for the senior physicians, which I'm including myself in, and I know I look young, but as I told the group this morning, there's a lot of city miles on this body. But for the senior physicians, here's going to be the tough lesson. You see, as opposed to what we did 2-3 decades ago, we just don't have the luxury anymore of learning about patients for the first time on the wards. Even if you can get that done, right, in the way of writing down all the stuff, you need bandwidth. You need bandwidth to be doing what I'm going to talk you through here in the way of reading and reacting to the individual learners. Okay? That'll make sense in a second. But the upshot is simply this. I don't have to know everything about a patient, but I got to know most of it. At least the general theme of this is why this person came in, this is what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? It'll make sense in a second. But the third reason is that now I'm looking through that roster and, to the best of my ability, assessing severity of disease, right? So, and there's a couple of reasons for this, right? One, because as part of my expectations, I will have already told the team, listen, there is an order by which I want to see the patients each day. It's the 3 Ds. First, I would like to see people that are dead or about to die. Okay? It's just embarrassing if they were alive at 8 a.m. but dead at 10:30 when we finally saw them. Okay? So anybody peri-ICU I'd like to see first. Second, I'd like to see anybody that could be discharged. Right? That's the second D, because the longer they stay, the longer they stay. Right? So we see them, we send them home early. And then third, I want to see the diagnostics. Right? So this is the Thanksgiving turkey in the oven, right? We don't put the casserole in first, we put the turkey. I want that CT, that MRI, that consult cooking at 8, as opposed to waiting to the end of attending rounds. Okay. Part of my lab spy is to assess that degree of severity, right? So I'm looking to Dr. Schulman there to validate this, because the difference, of course, between an intern and an R2, and this is going to be one of the things that I'm going to be using in the way of assessing autonomy, is simply the blank, right? The ability to look at a patient and say, he's sick, look at another patient, numbers be damned, he's not sick. The order in which they walk me around to see the patients, it is my way of assessing, did they get it? So if we see that septic patient first, and then pancreatitis, then GI bleed, then chest pain, got it, right? If we see patient on day 41 of 42 days of antibiotics first, no, you didn't get it. Right? It's like the guy that went to McDonald's and ordered the fish. You're missing the point, right? Yeah. All right. So that's going to be the assessing severity of illness. But the last thing, of course, is choosing the teaching topic. You see, because as the attending, what I can do is I can look through and say, oh, Felties. I don't know anything about Felties. But I can open a browser, learn all about Felties. And then on attending rounds, when they say, oh, yeah, Felties, then I can say, oh, Felties. I don't know much about Felties, but here's what I do know. Blah. Okay? Yeah, and they'll be like, wow, how do you know so much? And it's my opportunity to say, well, because I'm a doctor. Yeah? Yes, indeed. Well, and the last piece becomes the cardinal feature. Ready? And this extends past the lab spy, right? And what we're driving to is, and we'll pick up on this later tomorrow when we talk about the importance of autonomy with respect to burnout. But it's going to be this. The team can never see you doing their job. Now, they can see your role model parts of the job. I'm with that, all right? And we're going to see that a little bit at the bedside here in a second, right? I'm sorry, team. Am I being that annoying attending that brought you together for attending rounds and then went to do a colonoscopy and then came back? Yeah, sorry about that. It's going to show up on the ACGME survey. I'm sorry. But they cannot see you doing their job. Why? Because if they see you doing their job, one, you're going to rob them of that autonomy and purpose. And you'll see tomorrow, for those that can make it, when I talk about happiness and burnout, man, a burnout is not about an insufficient amount of yoga. Burnout is people that have no purpose, doing those rote things again and again and again. Why am I here? Existential crisis is what burns you out. They see you doing their job, they lose purpose. But more important for our patients, you see, is that there is going to come a day, and it will probably be Friday at 5 o'clock, when they're like, wow, I should run those labs, see if those cultures come back, right? Yeah, but there's this happy hour I want to get to, right? That's what will be in their mind. And then they'll say to themselves, well, Wiese always runs the labs. I'm sure he'll check them. Spoiler alert, I'm at the happy hour. Yeah. And there it is, that fly ball between second base and center field. They thinking I was going to do it, me thinking they were going to do it. So the key thing is they never see me do their job. But on the flip side, every now and again, as the attending, I've got to remind them that I'm watching. And so I'll wait, right, somewhere through rounds when they say, oh, yeah, his creatinine's 2.4. I say, really? Because he feels like a guy with a creatinine of 4.2. And they'll be like, oh, wow, how'd you know that? Got my eyes on you, man. Yeah? All right. So we come to this book, Back to Changing Culture, and the opportunity that awaits us inside this patient room. Anybody read this book? Yes, probably. You're like, oh, it's passé now, all right? And I'm with you. But of all the Gladwell books, still my favorite, mostly because I guess it was first. But the anecdote that I love out of this book is how they cleaned up New York City, right? You remember this one? It's back in the crime wave with lots of murders and rapes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so you would think the way that you clean up that crime wave is you go after those big things, right? We're going to be hard and heavy on the murders, the rapes, the armed robberies, et cetera. But that's not what they did. Now, instead, what they did is they put all efforts onto two things. One, cleaning up the graffiti, and two, busting people for jumping the tolls in the subways, right? So you didn't pay your toll, then we immediately arrest you, daisy chain you to lots of other people that were publicly humiliated there, right? And lo and behold, you fast forward 2-3 years, crime wave's gone. And why is that, you say? Well, because the thing about the tolls, what it had, that maneuver, as opposed to going after the rapes, the murders, et cetera, was that it was frequent, and it was accessible and tangible. Everybody heard about the rapes and the murders, but it wasn't directly affecting their lives, not for most of the 8 million people. But everybody was experiencing the subway, and everybody was seeing the arrests happen. And it was communicating that those small things, if that's going to get you arrested, you better believe those big things are going to get you in trouble. And that's what changed it. Once again, making the point that it is easier to act your way into new beliefs than it is to believe your way into new actions, particularly for those frequent, accessible, tangible things that are the habits throughout the wards. Here's where I'm driving to, the Purell, yeah? And I'm sure you guys have this as a rock star institution, the in and out standard, right? Everybody hits the Purell before you go in, everybody hits the Purell when you come out, right? Okay. So, here's the news I have for you. If today there was a randomized controlled trial that came out and said, hey, you know what, guys? We got it wrong, right? Purell doesn't change anything. You no longer have to wash your hands. We're all sufficiently colonized with the appropriate bacteria. Even if that came out, I'm still making my team hit the Purell when they go in and still making them hit the Purell when they come out. Why? Because it's inconvenient. That's why. And when that student says to me, oh, but this chaps my hands, that's when I say, damn right it chaps your hands. That's what I want. I want chapped hands. It is a moment of personal sacrifice that is inconvenient, where you have to stop what you're doing, walk over, hit the Purell, and then come back, right? It is the metaphorical equivalent in religious parlance of the genuflex. A moment of personal sacrifice to remind you that what you're about to walk into is sacred space. It's no longer about you now. So you make a sacrifice, you go in. That's that patient's room. It's not yours. And then when we come back out, you know what? Now it can be your space again as soon as you hit the Purell. And, of course, get ready for that rebuttal, right, from that student like, oh, but all I did was just stand in there. Well, you still have to hit it, man, right? Because out here in the hallway, we don't know. Maybe you just stood in there, right? Maybe you did a bare finger rectal. We don't know, all right? So when you come back out, you got to hit the Purell. But the bigger point is simply this. It's to remind people to act their way into the new belief that it is no longer about you when we cross that threshold. Well, okay, now we come to our team. And for people on video, I'm going to try to talk real loud, okay? But I want to bring my team in here. Come on over, team. And again, for this group, I want to try to, and I'm going to talk as loud as I can without the microphone. I'm going to try to be pragmatic, okay? Because to make this work, bedside rounds I'm talking about. Yeah, those microphones there? Yeah.
I'm there for you, Wiese.
Yes, always have been. All right. Okay. Better? Got that mic on? All right. So to make this work, here's what we got to do. Time management-wise, we can't round twice. Okay? That's killing us. And what I mean by rounding twice is we go to the HIPAA non-compliant hallway, talk about the patient, then we go in the room, and we do it all over again. Okay? So we're just doing it once. We're going to go to the bedside. I'm going to knock on the door. And as I'm knocking, this is important, right, because I'm giving very little space for rebuttals. As I'm knocking, I'm looking back at the team saying, hey, is there anything so super sensitive we can't talk about it in that room? All right? Now, what I will have communicated to them is that super sensitive means a really high bar. Because you know what? That's his information in there, the patient's, not mine. And guess what? Whatever it is that's so sensitive, it's eventually going to come out. Eventually. So, might as well be out there. And the third piece is, if you're worried about, oh, we're going to be talking about sensitive things in front of a patient, you know what? The only thing worse than hearing the news that you might have cancer is hearing about people out in the hallway talking about how you might have cancer, right? It's like going to an auto shop. You ever done that? Where you pull your car in, and then this guy opens the hood that's working on your car, right? And then he's like, hey, buddy, right? And he brings another dude over. You're like starting to get nervous, right? And he's like, wow, look at this. Hey, all right, you get four dudes, and all you can see, I think, through that glass pane is cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. You're like, oh, my God, what's it going to be, right? And they're like, oh, your gas cap just wasn't screwed on, right? But it's the worry. And hearing those whispers out in the hallway, that is the worst thing for the patient. I can promise you, having been one years ago, better to have it just with the patient itself. So we knock at the door. We walk in. All right, so who wants to be the patient? Anish? Yes, sir. All right, good. Why don't we have you lay down there? Yeah, as a patient? Yes, okay. Yeah, all right, I can already see my Press-Ganey score is going to take a hit on this one. Sorry we couldn't afford a bed, right? Affordable Care Act, that's part of it. Okay, so first thing for the team as you come in, all right, come over here, come with me, team, are going to be the introductions, all right? I'll get that in a second. But first, we have a decision to make with respect to the choreography. Okay? So, we have three options. Okay? One, come on in, team. We can do what I call the zoo approach, right? Which is, come over here, team. Oh, look at the patient in his natural environment. I wonder what he eats, right? Yeah, okay, burgers. Exactly. She knows this patient. Two, we could do what I call the sidebar, right? We're all to the side of the patient, which is better. We're getting closer to the patient, but of course one of us is blindsided, right? So the patient's looking at my backside, and more importantly, I can't see the patient. But the third, and this becomes important, and this is where we'll segue this with the introductions, when I'll say to the team, all right, and this line you got to memorize. Anybody is on this team has been on one of my teams can validate. We do it again and again and again. Right? And it is as much communication as it is inquiry. And the question's going to be, who is responsible for this patient? Okay, Elaine, right? So, Elaine, you stand right over there at the head of the bed. Good. And your supervisor, you stand right there. All right, good. But you understand, I'm going to try to get back on camera here while you guys hang out for just 1 second. You understand that the inquiry is communicating. What it's communicating to Elaine is this is your patient, right? And what it's communicating to the patient is this is your doctor. That's what I want to have. Because again, in 65 hours, I'm not around. What I want to start to build is this bond between these two. And you're going to see as we play through this, that's what I'm looking at with my optics of how tight is that bond. The tighter that bond is, the more that she sees him as her patient, and vice versa, the patient sees her as the doctor. Now, the more those two sync together, the more autonomy they get. Okay? Come to that in a second. My introduction to the patient is, hey, remember me? It's Dr. Wiese. I'm the doctor that supervises your doctors. Right? Because there can only be one relationship, doctor and patient, and that's what I want to facilitate because that's where she's growing, and again, in those 65 hours, that's what needs to exist. My role is supervising your doctors. Yeah? All right. So who's responsible for this patient? Elaine? All right, good. Now, this next part you don't have to do, though I'll tell you what I do, which is to kneel. All right? Now, If you have the luxury of chairs, you could also sit. But even with our new hospital, charity hospital, now in our 8th of the 8 charity hospitals, still no chairs. So I kneel. Now, if you're saying, well, but that's painful, okay. I'll give you this inside the actor's studio tip. In my lab coat is what's called a mouse pad. Anybody remember those? Yeah, you can buy them on eBay, like 50 cents, right? Little foam square, and I just drop that down, right? And I kneel on that foam square, right? Now, the reason for this is twofold. One, and most importantly, it's for the perception of time. There's actually good studies on this, right? And the central study was one in which they took two ward teams, and they said, all right, for ward team 1, here's what we want you to do. I want you to go around, see your patients, right? You are to spend 10 minutes with each patient, but you are to stand during those 10 minutes. For ward team 2, you are to go see all your patients for exactly 10 minutes, but you are to sit or to kneel, okay? Then they went back to the patients, and they said, hey, how long did your team spend with you? For the team that stood for those 10 minutes, any guesses? 2 minutes. That was the perception of time, you see. Yeah. Because what they see when you're standing is not this. What they see is this, right? Like, I am about to get out of here. And for the pragmatic folks, this is the definition of your loquacious patient, right? Because they're afraid that you're about to leave, which is why they're speaking with pressured speech, which is why they're unintelligible, right? And they know they're being unintelligible, which is why they say it again and again and again. If there's that zone of comfort, case in point, that team that sat or kneeled, anybody want to guess how much time was perceived? Almost 20 minutes. That the patient felt like the doctor was there to stay. Less pressured speech, more focused communication with you. Less time in the patient's room, even though it seems like more. But the other reason that I'm kneeling, stand over there if you will. All right, go ahead and lay back here. Good. Yep, head of the bed, right? Other reason I'm kneeling is for lines of sight. Because as she is presenting his information, right, out of the corner of my eye, I'm watching two things. One, his brow, right? Because if she says something absolutely crazy, like anthrax or Zika, right, I'll see his brow go like, right, up, yeah, or his pupils will dilate, like, oh my God, right? And it's my time to say, no, don't worry. She just reads the Journal of Anderson Cooper. It's all cool, right? It's not you. All right. But here's going to be one of the big values, okay, of committing to rounding at the bedside. Because you're about to see the accuracy of these history and physicals go through the roof. She says something wrong, he's going to protest, and I'll see it. And I'm just submitting to you, which ought to give you some sense of pause if you're rounding out in the hallway. The some percent of what the residents and intern students are telling you is not true or misconstrued, right? Just lost in translation. Once she knows that she's going to get called out, right, for anything that's erroneous, yeah, what you're going to find is she's going to spend a lot more time clarifying these history and physicals as she's taking it, right? Because it's embarrassing to be wrong in front of the patient. All right. Now, I know you're thinking about her, and you're like, oh, my God, this is going to be bad for her. Yeah, I'm going to come back to that because you know what? Yep, it is going to be bad for her. It's going to suck. She's going to sweat a lot. It's going to be embarrassing at times, but I'm going to make the case that there's a point to that, okay? And it's not because I'm a mean guy. But at the same time, while I'm watching this, right, supervisor standing right there, out of the other corner of my eye, I'm watching her, right? Because she's going to be doing one of two things as a supervising resident, right? Either one, she's going to be furiously writing this stuff down, right? That tells me this is the first time she's heard it. Now, she might have been a rock star intern when she could handle 5 patients on her own, but is having a harder time managing patients by proxy. Right? Doesn't mean that she isn't going to get there eventually. But what it means right now, she's going to need a little bit more supervision. Totally cool, right? Alternatively, she's standing over here, right, like a parent at a 5th grade school play, right, mouthing the words. Right? She's doing that. Yep, she's on top of this team. She gets more autonomy. And that's going to become really important, you see. Because, again, when we talk about burnout, and I'll get into this tomorrow, it's the mastery, autonomy, and purpose. You give somebody insufficient autonomy, then they find no purpose. That's where they start burning out. That's when they stop giving you best effort. My job is to make sure she has the supervision she needs so that patients stay safe, but at the same time, always giving out a little bit more rope so that she's growing, right? Staying engaged. All right, I can see in the audience, Dan Dressler being one here, that some of you do not have glasses, okay? You got to get glasses. Even if they're not real glasses, just buy some fake glasses, right? To be an attending, you got to have glasses. And the reason being is you want always to be in the position of communicating when she screws up, right, to the supervising resident. And that's all I got to say, right? This train wreck disaster is your responsibility. Take care of this. Yes, all right. All right, so the last thing I'm looking for, and the key thing really, because you see where I'm going in this, right? I've got optics on how much supervision autonomy I'm giving her, right? But I've got optics on how much supervision autonomy I'm giving her too, you see. Because what I'm looking for is what kind of bond do we have going here, right? And it's going to be on the spectrum for those basic science folks, you see. On the far left of the spectrum is going to be the inert, right, Freon. And you can find that as a first-year medical student. Take them to the wards, right? This will be a dog lab, right? There won't be a body there. It'll just be an abstract disease. No bond at all between these two, right? Somewhere in second, third year it starts, or into internship starts to become ionic, right? That they're sharing an electron, right? But only because the PKA is right? She's not thinking much about this patient outside of being on this team. But eventually, and you'll see this in your best interns and residents, that these two start to become covalent, that they are fully sharing an electron. And you'll know it's covalent when these two start having a sidebar as if you're not even there, right? When she's like, oh, we're going to change it to a beta blocker, he'll be like, what? You know, well, you remember we talked about this because of your reaction. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Dude, do I need to be here? And the answer is no, because once it's covalent, she gets autonomy. And the reason being is because later on, even in the evening, she doesn't know what to do. That's okay. She'll find somebody that does, because she's got skin in the game, you see, because she's got an electron bonded with that patient. And, of course, what you're ultimately looking for is the covalent double bond, right? So with the patient, but then also with the family, all synced together. Once you get that, that's somebody that's pretty much ready to go on their own, right? And that's my read and react as we walk through patient-centered rounds. But the last thing you ought to feel, getting back to our culture discussion and these new beliefs, you see, is that, yes, she's going to sweat a little bit. And I want her to feel that. I want her to feel the gravitas. Just the gravity of this isn't a disease, it's a patient, right? And I want this patient to see how much she is sweating and struggling through this. And you'll see it. It's actually quite endearing when it happens, right? So the students like crack voice and sweating, and you'll see the patient's hand come out. It's okay, baby. It's going to be all right, right? The patient's feeling empathy for the student, yeah? But I want the patient to see, and think about it, just the vast amount of intellectual and emotional capital that we invest in each individual patient. But they never see it because we're out in the hallway. And I want the patient to feel that, you know what, we're struggling our way to figure through to try to figure this out. And there are a lot, in all probability, going to be a lot of episodes where we're wrong, right? But we're having that discussion from the get-go. So it's not this uncomfortable at the end of hospitalization, oh, sorry, dude, we cut off your wrong leg, right? I mean, that apology we got to make. But a lot easier to make those apologies if the patient's been in the room all the way through. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, but what if the student says something wrong, right? All right, spoiler alert, they did pre-rounds, and the patient asked them, and they already said what was wrong. At least this is my opportunity to undo and to at least say, I can see why you thought that, but that's not the direction we're going to go, so that the patient feels like we're all on the same page. But most importantly, it's about a shared roles, goals, expectations, and beliefs with the patient. We're setting our own culture with the patient by setting what the expectations are. Because if we're in the room talking about, hey, Thursday's the day you're going home, then you know what? There isn't going to be this, oh, Thursday, today I'm going home? No, I don't have keys to my apartment. My aunt's in Ohio. What? Right? We set the expectation, right? They have an idea to mentally start planning for when this hospitalization comes to an end. Yes? All right. Well, team, thank you so much, and God's honest truth, I hope you get better, really. All right, thank you. Round of applause for our ward team. Yes, thank you. And this will be the one time where you actually left rounds right on time for grand rounds. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to do in the room, and the team's not going to know that I'm doing it, but again, I'm sneaking this in, and it's The Power of Habit. Anybody read this book? It's called The Power of Choice. Yes, all right, so one erudite member of the crowd. By Swartz, and he talks about how people love choice, right? Why? Because it gives them a sense of control over their environment. Anybody have toddlers, like little babies? Seen them on TV? Yeah, okay. So you know this, if you had a baby, just moving from the bottle to the high chair, right? And you put them in the high chair and then you give them some oatmeal, what do? Throw it on the floor, and to them it's freaking hilarious. It's so joyful of, oh, I threw oatmeal on the floor. And as a parent, you're like, dude, now you're just out some oatmeal. I mean, what's so funny about that? But for a baby, it's a sense of control over their environment. It's fascinating that they could do this and something happened, right? And Swartz points to the idea that giving people a sense of choice gives them a sense of control. Now, he does make the paradox, which is where I think the ABIM may maybe have missed the boat a little bit, that there is such a thing as too much choice, right? Like the breakfast diner menu, right, where there's got one of every food ever made, and you're just like, eggs, right? Which is simply to say too much choice takes away that sense of control. But apropos what we're going to do in the room, you see, is going to be this. 5 times for every patient, and the team won't even know it, I'm not going to tell them. 5 times for every patient, I'm going to give them a choice, and they're going to be innocuous choices. So I'll say to the patient, hey, do you want this water cup on this stand or on that stand? You want the curtain closed or open? Do you want the bathroom door open or closed, right? Do you want to watch Price is Right? Are you sure you don't want to watch something else, right? I mean, come on, yeah? But always a choice. Mm-hmm. Why? Because, listen, I don't know if you've ever been a patient. I have. And I can tell you the absolute worst part about being a patient is you are robbed of 100% of your choice. Where you used to be hungry, I'll just go to the refrigerator, get something to eat. Can't do that. Got to push a button. I have to go to the bathroom. Nope, can't do that. Got to call a nurse. Robbed of choice. And you stay in that bed without choice long enough, you become helpless. And then we as physicians, we wonder, why are people so scared to go home? And it's because their sense of choice is atrophied to the point that they're afraid. The way that you build back that well mentality is by giving patients choice. And even if it's innocuous choice, right, that they feel like they're getting some control over their environment. And that's getting you close to discharge day. But for the team, what I'm communicating without saying the words patient-centered care is that at the end of the day, the patient decides. This is going to be their choice. We can advise them of best things, what we'd like them to do, but it's their life. And if they want to choose to do something you don't like to do, that's okay. It's theirs to choose, right? But what you'll find, 5 times per patient, by the end of the month, if I get a team for 4 weeks, they'll ingrain it. They won't even know what happened to them. So when they go to give the patient those choices of antibiotics or antihypertensives, you'll find the resident, okay, well, you have 2 choices. Do you want beta blocker? Here are the benefits, advantages. Do you want ACE inhibitor? Benefits and advantages, right? They won't even know what's happened. Acting your way into those new beliefs. Once again, as a program director, we could do a curriculum. We could do a mandatory didactic on patient-centered care, but it ain't going to touch, right, the number of patients I see in a month with the team driving to that choice. Well, all right. An opportunity to talk about closed-loop communication. But before I get to that, anybody recognize this? Coming to America, exactly. All right, yes, indeed. And I can see, particularly for the residents, students, they did not get that. And that's okay, which reminds me of a story, which is, years ago, I was attending in June, okay? And it was funny. I mean, everything was good. I had good jokes. Team enjoyed it. And then, a month later, I'm attending in July. And suddenly, I'm not funny. And I'm like, man, what the hell happened, right? It's the same jokes. These have always worked, right? So I kept trying, still not funny. Then it dawned on me, wow, suddenly, they're out of my frame of reference, right? They don't get my jokes. They haven't seen my movies. So I came home. I told my wife, I was like, hey, you got to get me in-service on the youth, right? Well, what is it culturally they like, et cetera. So she gave me, my wife's good at this, listens to NPR and all that business. So she gave me these movies to watch, and so I came back with like new jokes, right, and or new references, which almost worked, right? Because what I got back from the students and residents was, almost, Wiese. It was almost funny. I was like, all right, this is not working. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? But then it dawned on me, you know what? I'm the attending. And as it works out, also the program director. So now what I do is I give expectations. I lay it out for the team. And I say, listen, I'm going to give you a list of movies. You don't have to watch these movies, but if you do, I'm going to be a lot funnier. All right? And you're only working a 16-hour shift, so I know you got time to watch the movies. So here you go. All right, Coming to America, you get the volleyball movie up there. All right, yes, all right, fair enough. But it takes me back to McDowell's, which is simply to remind all of us of where the restaurant industry figured out closed-loop communication way before we did, right? You know what I mean by closed-loop communication? Yes. Well, it's basically get it, got it, good. So you say something, and then they repeat it back to you, and you validate that's right. And if it wasn't right, then you make the correction. It's what a drive-through at McDonald's has been doing for years. You drive up, and you say, hey, I want 3 shakes and 4 burgers, right? Don't judge me, I'm American, right? And they reply back, okay, 4 shakes and 3 burgers. You're like, no, 3 shakes and 4 burgers. Okay, 3 shakes, 4 burgers. Get it, got it, good. Mm-hmm. As you come out of the rounds, your opportunity to get your team to act their way into this new belief of communication. And once again, listen, we could do a PowerPoint mandatory module about the importance of closed-loop communication on signing out patients, right? That you say stuff about the patient, you ask the night float to repeat it back, you make corrections and or validate it, right? We could do that. Or 14 times a day, or whatever our service is, we could act our way into this. By me as the attending saying, all right, Stephen, good. Here's what we're going to do. Blah, 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 blah. Now repeat it back to me, right? And the resident repeats it back to me, and I say, good, that's what we're going to do. Now you do that for 2-3 weeks, and what you'll find at the end of the week, they'll bust you, right? Or the end of that month where you're like, all right, so we're going to get the echo and then call cardiology. All right, that's cool. They're like, no. Repeat it back. Repeat it back. You're like, all right, you got it. Well, okay, time to talk a little bit about feedback, and I'm getting to the top of the hour, it appears, but I don't want to end without getting a little bit into this. And before feedback, because this will set the stage for tomorrow, I want to talk about shared roles. Anybody read this book? Of course not. No, this was a book written by one James Carse. Yes, 1972, I believe. Religion professor at NYU. Yeah, and he talked about how the world sees, people see each other in one of 2 ways, finite or infinite games. Now, look at me real quick, everybody, okay? Because I'm not going to be morally responsible for this. If you are going to read this book, you are to make no major life decisions while doing it. Because this book will screw you up. I don't mean kinda. I mean you're going to be rocking in the corner listening to Coldplay eating porridge. That kind of screwed up, right? Because it's going to mess with you a little bit because Car's going to talk you through those finite, infinite games. And the finite games, and it might help you if you imagine this as a football game or as a play, right? Finite beginning and a finite end. That's the definition of a finite game. Football game starts, football game ends. In a finite game, people are playing roles, and they are abstractions of themselves. Right? The person playing Hamilton is not actually Hamilton, right? It's Miranda, right? It's somebody acting in that role. In a finite game, the singular purpose is to win the game. That's it. And we measure the utility of any action by whether it helps you win that game or not. And importantly, in a finite game, what is not explicitly prohibited is implicitly allowed. Workarounds. All right. What about infinite games? The best way to describe an infinite game is to take you back to grade school. Remember those days? Playing outside with your buddies after school, right? And you get the kids playing. I don't care what game it was. Touch football or dodgeball, kick the can, whatever. And one team starts to win, right? what do the kids do? They change the rules, right? Hey, let's swap quarterbacks. Or, hey, if you guys throw this ball, it goes off the garage and in the hoop, you get 30 points, right? And then they'll stop the game to allow that to self-correct, right? And then they keep playing. Because the goal of an infinite game, you see, is just to push the sun back up in the sky for one more hour until Mom calls us home. Just to play and keep playing. Now, you look at that, and you tell me I'm wrong. Doesn't that make you happy? Does me. Then you say to yourself, wow, where'd those days go? Middle school. That's where they went. Because in middle school, we stopped learning, and we started educating, right? We started measuring things. And know this about any infinite play, right? Anything that you do for the innate utility of just doing it. Then once you measure it, once you put high stakes on it, say a USMLE score or shelf score, now it stops being infinite play, learning for learning's sake. Now it starts becoming a finite game that is doing what has utility and helping you win that game. Now the scary part, and this is where it might mess you up a little bit, this will be a good segue for my talks tomorrow for people that can make it, is that the people that you're dealing with, these students, these interns, their residents, right, they're not just good at playing finite games, they're the Jedis of playing finite games. It's the only way they can get to Emory. They had to get all A's in high school to get into the best colleges. They had to get all A's in the best colleges, those semesters, right? Right? See that litany. From the football game to the semester in college to the clerkship, right, to the rotation. They had to get all A's or all honors in their medical school rotations, right, in order to qualify to get to be here or Tulane or wherever. But the point is, this is the way they've been socialized to think in the way of finite games. And when you go to give them feedback, you should not be surprised that what you see is this cataract-like stare. Because in the back of your mind, when you talk about systems of care and interprofessional communication, et cetera, what they're hearing is Charlie Brown teacher voice. Wah, 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 wah. Because what they want to say to you is, but did I get honors? And if they ask you for feedback, it's going to be, how am I doing? Right? They know how they're doing. They just want to know, am I winning this finite game or not? And if you're going to give feedback as you come out of the wards, it comes down to, well, listen, we got to get them off thinking in the way of finite games. Now, I will say this. There's nothing wrong with finite games. You got to win your finite games, right? In academic parlance, hey, you got to get promoted or you're out, right? Got to win your finite games to keep playing. Where finite games become a problem is when they compromise infinite play. That is when we start doing a medical school clerkship to the exclusion of actually learning medicine, right? Now, this is why finite games, you see, just to make it tangible, and I'll end on this, see, or shortly thereafter, this is where finite games make you unhappy. Because tell me you haven't heard this. Residents, too. Is this going to be on the exam? Because implicit in that question, you see, is if it's not going to be on the exam, I'm not going to study it. There could have been learning take place there, but if it's not on the exam, then there's no utility in me spending time on that, not helping me win my finite game, right? You know, why are your medical students always leaving the wards early? Maybe they're not here, but at most places they are. And it's because they figured it out. You can do your evaluations however you want, and you can weight faculty assessments 90%, but they're all going to be 8 or 9 out of 10 homogeneous, and the only thing that will stratify that student class into A versus B is going to be their shelf exam. And so they've governed their behavior to leave the wards where learning how to be a physician could have taken place to go to a coffee house to study for that shelf. And the key thing is they're not millennials and they're not bad people. They've been socialized to think this way. Our opportunity in changing that role of just winning the game to acquiring those skills that are going to make them great for the long term sits in a feedback. Here's the way I do it, and I'm going to give you two pieces of advice, and then I'll end because I am over time. My apologies. But the two things that I do for the students is, one, I say, hey, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to write out 10 competencies here, not ACG me, just things that I find to be very tangible skills that will make you great at this, okay? And what I want you to do is I want you to put one penny on your weakest area, and I'll have a penny. I'll put it on what I think is your weakest area, and then we're going to spend our time talking about how you improve. But you see, you could be the best student at Emory, and you're going to get treated this way. You could be the worst student at Emory, you're going to get treated exactly the same way. I'm not, in no way going to tell you where you sit in the way of winning your finite game. What I'm communicating to you is this lifelong skill of however good you are, you need to improve. And we're going to find ways to improve you. And my communication by that strategy is we're just dodging that, whether you're getting an A or not, and we're going to focus on how you get better. And your second strategy is to get rid of those words that convey finiteness, like but, right? Anybody know the feedback sandwich? Yes, looks good on paper, I get it. It's a lot better than what we used to have, which I think Dave will attest our surgical colleagues at Hopkins taught us so well, right? Which is, this is, you suck and this is why, right? So the feedback sandwich was some good stuff and then the bad stuff and then some good stuff, right? Which sounds great until it's you getting sandwiched. Right? Case in point, this happened to me last month where my wife was like, hey, I just want to tell you, Wiese, I really appreciate you picking up the house and doing the dishes and cleaning out the yard. I'm like, what? Who are you and what you do with my wife? I don't get compliments from my wife. Oh, man, I'm getting sandwiched. All right? And then everything went to blah, 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 waiting for the other shoe to drop. But, right? And that's where the sandwich paralyzes. The strategy might be what I call the feedback pizza, right? To get rid of the word but and substitute in the word and. Hey, Stephen, here's what I love about what you're doing here. Dot, 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 dot. And here's how it could be even better. But signals the end. You tried your hardest and you came up wanting. You failed. And conveys infinite. That you were great and this is how you could be even better, right? Which is, put another way, hey, you won the gold medal, and next time, this is how you could set the world record. All right, I'm going to stop at that point and just close by saying, hey, listen, this thing of culture, I get it. And as an administrator, I've used it year in, year out. If there's a committee meeting that's going south or going in the wrong direction, all you have to do is say, oh, but that's not our culture, right? It's like succinylcholine for the crowd. Everybody's like, oh, you're right. Oh, when are we meeting next? But I'm going to make the case to you that I think we can own culture. And I'm going to make the case to you, too, that what we're doing in the way of student education, resident education, faculty education, it's really not about the what of thinking. And even if you're really good at that, you can't compete with up-to-date. You can't compete with the internet anymore. You just can't. Knowledge and factual facts can be accessible easier on people's own time by using those electronic devices. But what we can do, and what is sorely lacking, I believe, is getting people to see the world in a different way, to see each other in a different way. Changing that culture such that no longer are the sign-in sheets, no longer is somebody following you around. Changing the culture that governs behavior in the way that is patient-centered. But that's our role. Put another way, it's not what you think. It's how you think. Yeah? And regardless of what you thought about this talk, I think we'll agree it was definitely not what you thought. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.